Hello everyone, this is Kevin Wallace. Welcome to a 6th video series on the OSI model. OSI, that stands for Open Systems Interconnect Model. And in the first video in this series, we're going to give you an introduction to the OSI model. Why do we need a model? How can that help us in our day-to-day networking? And we're going to see something in the first video about the OSI model. We're going to see that it has 7 different layers, and we can categorize different elements of just about any network into one or more of those 7 layers. So the subsequent videos in this series are going to focus on the various layers, beginning with layer 1, the physical layer, concerned with getting bits out on the wire. Layer 2, the data link layer, that's where something like an Ethernet switch might reside. Layer 3, the network layer, that's where something like a router might live in our network. The transport layer, at layer 4, here's where we have protocols like UDP and TCP. Obviously, I'll be giving you a lot more detail as we go through the videos. And finally, we're going to wrap it up with the upper layers, layers 5 through 7, and that's going to be in our 6th video. Hope you enjoyed this 6th video series. Let's go ahead and get started with an introduction to the OSI model. As we mentioned, OSI, that stands for Open Systems Interconnect Model. In fact, it starts to get a bit like acronym soup because the International Standards Organization, the ISO, came up with the OSI model, so it's the ISO OSI model, and the OSI model can categorize network technologies in general into one or more of 7 different layers. And it's critical that you understand the functions of these layers as you go further in your networking career and you start learning about routers and switches. You're going to be hearing about layer 3 devices or layer 2 devices, or someone might say that you have a physical layer issue. It's important to understand what all that means. And at the bottom, at the foundation of this OSI model, we have layer 1, the physical layer. The layers start at the bottom and go up. Numbering wise, it's like a building. The bottom floor of a building is floor number 1. And the physical layer, we're going to have a video just on that, is our foundational layer. This is where we're concerned about bits on the wire. How do we electrically represent data as we're transmitting it on the network? And then we're going to take a look at layer 2, the data link layer. At the data link layer, we have an Ethernet switch as an example. This is where we're paying attention to MAC addresses. We've got a video just on the data link layer coming up for you. Then at layer 3, again counting from the bottom, we have the network layer. This is where IP addressing resides. This is where routers live. Very, very important layer for us. And again, we've got an entire video just on the network layer. Moving up one more layer, layer 4 is the transport layer. The 2 big players here at the transport layer are TCP, Transmission Control Protocol, and UDP, User Datagram Protocol. We've got a video for you just on the transport layer. And then the top 3 layers, their functions tend to blur a little bit. In fact, we might be examining a network technology and think, I don't really know if this has a session layer, for example. And that's okay. Not every network has components that plug into all 7 layers of this stack. We'll talk more about that in just a moment. But realize that some networks will indeed have a session layer protocol. That's a layer 5 protocol that's responsible for setting up, maintaining, and tearing down sessions. Up at layer 6, we have the presentation layer. The presentation layer is concerned with the formatting of data. One of the big things that happens at the presentation layer for security is encryption. We're presenting the data as encrypted data for security purposes. And then, topping everything off, up at layer 7, the application layer. This is one of the most misunderstood layers because a lot of students will see the term application and they start thinking about a desktop application. We're not talking about Microsoft Word here. We're talking about services. Email is an application layer service, but Microsoft Outlook as an email client, that would not fit here. We're not talking about end user applications. We're talking about services on the network. Those are your 7 layers from the bottom up. physical, data link, network, transport, session, presentation, application. You need to memorize these in order, and I've got a couple of memory aids for you. Let's think about an acrostic that will allow us to start at the top of the stack and work our way down starting at layer 7. You might want to remember the acrostic. All people seem to need data processing. The A in all, reminding us of the A in application. The P in people, reminding us of the P in presentation. S for session. T for transport. N for network. D for data link. And another P again for physical. All people seem to need data processing. That's a top-down approach to memorizing these 7 layers. If you prefer to go from the bottom, layer 1, and go up to layer 7, here's another acrostic for you. You could remember, please do not throw sausage pizza away. The P in please reminding us of the P in physical, and then D for data link, N for network, T for transport, S for session, P for presentation, and A for application. Please do not throw sausage pizza away. And when we start talking about different networking technologies, we might make observations such as a switch, an Ethernet switch, resides at the data link layer, or layer 2. A router resides at the network layer, or layer 3. Or a certain protocol might reside at the transport layer. But as you're analyzing a network, it's okay if you're not able to identify a protocol or a device that's filling one of these layers, especially filling one of these upper layers. You might have a network application running and it doesn't seem to have a session layer, or maybe it doesn't seem to have a presentation layer. That's okay. Don't feel like you need to populate every single layer every single time. This reference model was developed not just for TCP/IP based networks, which is our primary focus on modern networks. It was developed back in the day where there was actually an OSI protocol. And we used to talk in the early 90s about how AppleTalk and IPX plugged into this model. So it's not a perfect fit for exactly what we're doing today. And I've heard different metaphors to describe the OSI model. I've heard it described as a building where you go down different floors of a building and you run across the street and you go up the floors of a neighboring building in order to get data from one building to the other. And I've heard metaphors about taking a letter and inserting it in an envelope and addressing the envelope and sending the envelope over to the other building, and you open up the envelope and you extract the message. When I hear those metaphors, I usually find something that breaks down for me logically. I'm not a huge fan of those metaphors personally. The best metaphor for me that I've heard is comparing the OSI model to a bookshelf. Here's a picture of my bookshelf that I have in my home, and notice that I have things somewhat organized. Down in the lower left-hand corner, I've got a collection of books that I have authored or co-authored. Just above that, I have my Star Wars collection. And you see that I've got 1 or 2 shelves without any books on them. That's okay. Remember, we said we didn't have to populate every single layer of the OSI model for every given network. And I like the bookshelf metaphor because it really speaks to the purpose of the OSI model. It's a way to group what I would refer to as like-minded applications or like-minded devices together. For example, at layer 3, the network layer, routers make forwarding decisions, or they can make forwarding decisions based on layer 3 IP addresses. So IP addresses, routers, they're somewhat similar in nature, so they're both grouped together at layer 3. Just like I've grouped my Star Wars books together, and I've grouped the books that I've written together. I hope this metaphor and the memory aids will serve you as we go through the next several videos, which are going to start breaking apart and dissecting exactly what's going on inside the different layers of the OSI model. We'll see you back for our next training video, where we'll take a close look at the physical layer.